Hello, everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities space. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. We bring you the information. You do your own research. And today's guest is a student of the Austrian School of Economics, an expert on sound money, and the founder of the Endgame Investor. Somebody I always love talking to. It's Rafi Farber. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jesse, good to be back.
Good to have you back. I want to start with a broad question, as I like to open up the show with, to get an idea of where my guest's head is at when it comes to the economy. So I'm wondering, what are the main trends right now that you're watching when it comes to both precious metals and the global economy that you think more people should be paying attention to?
Let me reverse that question. Well, what should people be paying less attention to? There's always things to be paying attention to, and you can get caught up in the details and look at this trend, look at that trend, and I do that too. I see something that catches my eye, and I follow it for a few weeks or a few months, and then sometimes it turns out to be a dud, and the answer isn't there. And then if that does turn out to be a dud, then you're like, oh, well, I guess the end game's never happening. I guess the dollar will survive forever. And no, that's not the case. So, instead of focusing on one thing, my advice is to just take a step back and look at the situation that we're in and sort of get a feel for the general insanity of everything. And it's clearly getting worse by the week or the month or whatever short time you want to use. Whatever the craziness started in 2020, it just keeps getting worse, and the media gets less and less believable, and so by extension, whatever they're saying about the monetary system and the dollar and inflation is getting less and less believable. So just keep in mind just the broad perspective of things. And I know that's less than satisfying, but I am following something, as I always am, as a possible trigger. So I can tell you what it is now. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the thing. And well, before I say anything about that, what I'm paying less attention to is what's going on with BRICS. And some people think that's a serious trigger, a serious issue that could cause the end of the dollar-based system. And it's true, it could. In my thinking, not really, because the whether the BRICS like it or not, their currencies are still based in the dollar, and they can't really get around that unless they're willing to go back to gold and silver, because there's nothing else that would subvert the dollar except for the metals. And as much as the BRICS say they want to get around the dollar, they can't unless they go to sound money, because that's the only thing underneath. And if the BRICS go to sound money, that means they have to trade honestly. And the BRICS they're not saints. They're not great people. The people in charge of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, I think that's what BRICS stand for. I wouldn't call them, economically illiterate. They're just kleptomaniacs like the West. They're looking for their opportunity to be in charge of the kleptocracy instead of the U.S. So they want to inflate. That's what they want to do. So I don't trust them. And therefore, they're not going to be able to get around the dollar unless they're honest, and they're not honest. So what the BRICS is really doing is they're creating infrastructure, and infrastructure is important because if the dollar does fall, they'll need trading infrastructure, or they'll need currency infrastructure. So that's good. But it's not going to cause the fall of the dollar unless they go to gold and silver, which they're not doing. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Other people have different perspectives, but whatever. What I'm looking at right now is the rising repo volume, actually, that it's been going up in a diagonal since around late 2021, early 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Now we're trading about $2.1, $2.2 trillion a night. And these dollars are finite. There aren't an infinite amount of these dollars to be traded every night in the repo market where banks lend to other banks. So I'm looking at the dollars in reserve, the bank reserves that are owned by banks. I mean, a bank reserve is, instead of, if you have money in a checking account, let's say you have $10,000 in your checking account, that is on the bank's balance sheet, but it's a liability to you. They owe it to you. A bank reserve is the bank's own dollars in their checking account at the Fed. They don't owe it to anybody. So that's the spare dollars that exist. And the last time we hit a repo crisis, was at the ratio of 87% of bank reserves were being used up in repo transactions. That's when the repocalypse hit. That's really when the last financial crisis hit. And arguably, you could connect the dots and say, though I haven't done the research on myself, but I think it's pretty plausible to say that the whole, China thing, let's not say the name, was an excuse to print money to mitigate the repo crisis that was going on since September. So let's just say I would take that as plausible. So once we get to a ratio of about 87% of current reserves being taken up by repos, I think we're going to hit another repo crisis, and then we'll hit another money printing bonanza. And by the way that the repo volume is rising and that reserves are falling together, we should be there in a few months. It could be 2 months, could be 6 months, something like that. But it's not going to be years. And that's what I'm watching right now. It's like just two trains headed in the opposite direction, and I see where they're going to collide. Not exactly when, but the direction is clear.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. Interesting thoughts there. You mentioned kind of the insanity that's been going on. I want to read something that you recently wrote on your Substack. As the endgame closes in, we should expect some really freaky stuff out of the leadership. Biden throwing in the towel with a tweet would be an example of that, and then not showing up in public for days, and nobody knows if he's alive and whatnot. Since then, apparently, he's appeared in public, though not looking too energetic, let's say that. This is all end of empire, insane stuff. Endgame on the front end, you could say. Now, in addition to this, the insanity of the political scene in the US, the attempted assassination of Trump, on and on. We've been seeing a growing level of debauchery and immoral behavior from the political class. California now passing a law that if a child wants to transition, they don't have to tell the parents. They can hide it from the parents, almost like they're helping out the kid in secret to take hormone blockers and all this insane stuff. Is this sort of crazy behavior something new? Is there historical precedence? I mean, people point to the Weimar Republic. Apparently, Berlin was a den of absolute debauchery around that time as well. Can you draw any parallels with that or other moments in history?
Oh, absolutely. It happens again and again and again. This is par for the course. I mean, they talk about the craziness of Roman emperors in the late stages of the Roman Empire. Maybe they give an excuse that lead pipes or plumbing was made out of lead, so there was lead poisoning that might have contributed to it. But then, you go to America and you see everyone on phones, not spending any time with people, socializing, kids not going out with their friends. And you could easily say that is really affecting brain chemistry. And I'm addicted myself to it. I see it, and lucky for me, I keep Shabbat, which means I disconnect from my phone for religious reasons on Saturdays and holidays. So I do get 1 week where I have nothing to do with it. But I do have to control the addiction. It's everybody has the same issue, and this is probably changing brain chemistry in a similar way to lead poisoning in Rome, and the way that emperors like Caligula acted with his orgies and incestual craziness. And you go back to even earlier history, and in my own history, in the first temple times, it's recorded in the Talmud that the late kings were insane. Some of them committed incest, some of them tattooed their private areas with names of other gods. Just really insane behavior by these late governments. And also in the Second Temple period. I mean, that's when Christianity was born, and we know how insane Herod was, and he was the last major power in the Second Temple period, and that is really what led to the destruction of the Second Temple. So it happens to us all over and over again. Insane governments at the end of empires, and it happened to Rome. It's happening to America. It's all the same thing, and the society gets more debauched and crazy, losing sight of God, losing sight of morality, losing sight of mental balance. It's obvious that it's happening, and exactly where it ends, we don't know. And people are looking to Trump as a kind of savior figure. I guess he's slightly less bad, but in terms of if you think about a real statesman who can lead a country, it's like, okay, Trump. I mean, I guess he's better than Kamala Harris, who's she's a scary. What she's I don't know. I don't know this for sure, but it seems that she's on some kind of mind altering drugs or something, because like normal people don't act like that, and it's scary to have somebody like her in line for the presidency. Even though I don't think she's going to win, I'd rather have Trump. But these are both subpar people, and reflective of insanity in both directions. So yeah, it's a mess, and it's going to implode.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there on the choices of presidential candidates. I mean, Trump talking about getting Jamie Dimon at I think he wants him to be head of the Fed or something like that.
I don't know. He denies that, but even so, yeah, I was just saying he did, like somebody showed me on Truth Social, whatever it's called, that he denied that he's going to pick Jamie Dimon. Okay, fine, but like in 2016, he picked all of these swamp creatures to lead all of his cabinet positions. What was it, Rex Tillerson and somebody in pharma to head the? I don't know. He just like bowed down to Trump, to Fauci, and he brought us Operation Warp Speed. And he didn't really stop the lockdowns. He didn't really try to stop the lockdowns or try to discipline any of the governors. You could argue, people argue that, oh, he couldn't do that as a president. He doesn't have power over the states. Fine, whatever. But like, he didn't do it. He didn't drain the swamp in 2016. What makes you think he's going to do it now? You could say, okay, maybe a quest for vengeance, which, okay, fine. Maybe he will. And I hope he will. I'm rooting for him. I would vote for him if I was voting, but I don't think he's going to do it. I don't think he has the power to do it. And I think the CIA would kill him if he really tried.
Very well said there. Now, you recently had Keith Weiner on your show, and the two of you have somewhat of a conflicting view in that Keith believes it will take years for the dollar to potentially die, whereas you think it could happen more quickly. Keith is a guest I have on this show sometime. I'm actually going to be talking to him as well on the show in a couple of weeks. I'm wondering if you could break down that, I don't know if you would call it a debate, but the kind of difference of opinion there, and where you see things differently.
I think I can't speak for Keith exactly. I don't quite understand fully his view, but I think I get the basics of it. And from what I see, the differences between me and him is that he sees the pyramid as gold's on the bottom, gold and silver on the bottom, and on top of that's the dollar. On top of that are other currencies, and that we agree on. And then on top of the currencies are stocks, and then bonds, and then other derivatives, and then Bitcoin all the way on top. Where we agree on that. Where we diverge is that he thinks that because the dollar is on the bottom of the pyramid, right above gold and silver, then by definition, when other currencies fall, right, they go to dollars, which is true, they do. Like what if let's say some third world currency dies, or like in Argentina or Zimbabwe or whatever, they'll all hoard dollars instead of their local currencies. So the demand for dollars there will go up, and that will keep the price inflation from hitting the dollar, because once demand for the dollar in foreign countries goes up because their currencies are dying, then that's the signal for America to be able to export their inflation to other countries and keep prices down at home. Fine, I agree with that too. However, the difference between Keith and I is that other currencies, other major currencies, not third world currencies, but like, let's say the yen or the euro, or the pound, right? These countries, or the yuan, these countries own a lot of dollar derivative treasuries, right? So when their currencies fall, what do? They sell the treasuries, and then they sell the dollars to protect their currencies. And once they sell the dollars, as the yen, let's say the yen collapses, they're going to sell treasuries because they have no choice, and that will bring the inflation back into the United States. Um, and all of the export of inflation that's been happening since, like, say, 1933 none of that inflation is gone. It's not like the United States exports dollars and then they just leave forever and that's it. They're done. But when other major currencies fall, they're going to sell treasuries, and that is going to bring the dollars back to the U.S. and exacerbate the inflation problem in the dollar. So Keith is right when he says, in my opinion, that when third world countries that have very few dollar derivatives, when their currencies die, they demand dollars. But when the yuan is dying, what do? They sell dollars. So when they sell dollars, who are they selling them to? They're selling them back to the States. And that takes the exportation of inflation that kept the dollar strong until now to importation of inflation, which exacerbates the inflation problem in terms of price increases, and the dollar dies. And then with that, all the other currencies die with it. So my thesis, in one sense, is that when a major currency is under threat of hyperinflation, the dollar will die with it, because a major currency with dollar derivatives is basically the dollar, just backed by treasuries.
Very fascinating points of view there. I do want to talk about platinum. It's reached levels where it is almost as undervalued as it's ever been versus silver, as you pointed out in a recent video on your YouTube channel. Platinum, obviously, much different than gold and silver in that it's not money. It's an industrial commodity, mostly used, I believe, in catalytic converters. Is there still a case for adding platinum to one stack? Because it is a way to store wealth outside of the traditional financial system that it does share in common with gold and silver.
Yeah, I think there is a place for platinum. I own 1 ounce of platinum. I'm thinking of expanding it to maybe a few, maybe 5 or 6 or whatever, and exchanging some of my children. I was in contact with a bullion dealer in Israel about doing this, exchanging my silver for platinum. It hasn't come through yet. I got to call the guy. Thinking about doing it. I'm not like in a rush to do it or anything, but my point with that is that if you look at the silver to platinum ratio, right? It's at 30, 32, 33 now. I bought my platinum just by happenstance. Somebody said, "Look, Rafi, I got a platinum coin. Can I have some silver?" I'm like, "Okay." So I checked the ratio, and then I found it was 34. I was like, "Okay, fine." I don't have any. I'd like some. It's cool. I like it. And then after we finished the transaction, I looked at the long term chart, and I'm like, "Whoa, 34 is like an all time low." And so it's risky because it's less liquid. It's not as good of a money. I can't say that it's not a money, because there's no objective money. There's no like metal that has money status and then therefore other commodities that do not have money status. It's not like a hard line. It's a continuum. There's more liquid and less liquid commodities. The more liquid is the money. The less liquid, the less money. So platinum is less liquid than gold and silver, but it's more liquid than a lot of other commodities. Because it doesn't go bad and has those same qualities as gold and silver, except it's just less liquid for historical reasons, higher melting point, harder to make into money, a lot of other secondary reasons that I don't really understand that much. That's the way it is. So my point with that is, if you want some platinum and you want to free up some space and you have like silver that's like to the brim in your safe or whatever, wherever it is you keep it, and you want to free up some space, then you can trade a few ounces of silver for some platinum at a good exchange rate right now, and it might not be a bad idea. In terms of catalytic converters, I looked at a chart going back in platinum from about 1910, right before catalytic converters were a thing, and it was a much higher ratio of platinum to silver back then. So then the question is, like, let's say that there's no more catalytic converters because everyone goes to electric cars or whatever, which I think is a stretch. I don't think that's going to happen. But even if it did, what would happen is that the price of platinum would go down, and then that would encourage other stackers or jewelry companies or any other industry that uses platinum to increase their platinum purchases because the price would go down. So I don't think that even a lower demand in catalytic converters would permanently bring platinum down, because I looked at the historical charts before there were catalytic converters and it was much higher than it is now. So just basically, look, I don't understand everything about platinum, but I see the charts, and if you want some, you think it's awesome. It is denser than gold, which is pretty cool. You hold one, it's pretty cool to hold. You can get some. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Trader Ferg, Andy Hosey from Finding Value Finance. They're both pretty bullish on platinum because they believe that obviously this EV revolution isn't going to happen. Hybrids will end up being perhaps the bigger winner than EVs, and those still require platinum for their catalytic converters. Also, I mean, the whole green narrative, I'm sure you agree, is not exactly going to go as these politicians think it will. This brave new world full of renewable energy and everybody driving an EV is somewhat of a pipe dream, especially when you consider emerging economies and they can't just suddenly switch to these things. I want to talk about the U.S. debt and turn to something Mario Ineco said on X in regards to how it could be solved. He said, hyperinflation is the best way out of this. Creditors would be wiped out, but the debt would too. Economic growth under the current scenario would never alleviate the situation. What are your thoughts there? Do you agree that hyperinflation is actually the best way out of this scenario?
I don't say it's the best way out. It's the most plausible way out, and it's probably what's going to happen, because there's only two options, really. You can't grow yourself out of theft. Right? Inflation it's stealing. And the idea of growing yourself out of stealing is that if you get the people to produce more and more stuff that you can steal without them noticing, then things can limp along for a while longer, but it never solves the problem. We've been growing out of theft since the 1930s, and we're already like 80 years into this, and it's going to end. So there's no growing out of it. And even if you did grow out of it so that the problem became less noticeable for a while, the debt would just keep building anyway. You got to get rid of the debt. So there's two ways to do it. Only two ways to do it. Either you do it honestly, and let's say Trump has some kind of God moment, and he's like, look, we can't do this anymore. We're just going to default on everything, and let the chips fall where they may, and set up safety nets wherever he can, keep law and order in the big cities as it's happening, something like that. None of this is going to happen. So this is all just like theoretical, and then just let the treasuries fall, and then the dollar would survive. Anyone who owns treasuries would default. All the banks would collapse. The entire financial picture would have to be reorganized. Lots of people would starve to death, but hopefully, there'd be enough law and order to prevent a complete zombie apocalypse, and that's one way out. And then you start with sound money again. Okay, that would be the honest way to do it. And therefore, like, anyone who has dollar cash or gold would survive, right? Just like the Great Depression, except much, much worse. The other way is we're going to keep paying this debt, but there's no way to do it other than just like print the money to pay it. And then the debt is repudiated anyway, and you have the same exact process, except the major difference being that people who have dollar cash also have nothing, and the only people that have any purchasing power left are those with gold and silver and other real assets that are much less liquid, right? Let's say people with just cars and real estate and a business or two that is now bankrupt and only has its capital to sell at a discount. They would have some purchasing power, but a lot less than people with gold and silver, because businesses and cars and inventory and real estate are much less liquid than gold and silver, which is why their prices go crazy every time there's a boom and a bust. Right? That's what makes them not money. Doesn't mean they're worthless, but it means they're not money. So yeah, hyperinflation is the most plausible way out of it, and we are headed there. And once it happens, everything that would happen in a debt repudiation is going to happen anyway. There's two paths, but they go like this and they meet up. We can either go this way or this way, and we end up in the same place. So, take your pick. Either way, you'll be fine with gold and silver. In a debt repudiation, you'd also be fine with physical dollar cash, not with deposits. They would go away. And the other way, you'd only be fine with gold, and dollar cash would be dead too.
So I had Alistair McLeod on the show recently. He thinks a coming collapse in all credit-based instruments, including fiat, bonds, stocks, will leave only gold and silver standing. So in his mind, owning stocks is somewhat of a dangerous proposition because he thinks that he rightly believes they are credit-based instruments. Although in theory they represent ownership of a company, they would also be affected by this kind of collapse. Would you agree with that? Do you stay outside of the stock market? Do you also speculate on gold and silver miners with a percentage of your portfolio? How do you think about that?
I think McLeod is basically right here. I do speculate on gold mining stocks, and I could be wrong for doing that. It makes me nervous. I don't spend all my money on it, obviously, but I do own some gold and silver mining stocks. Um, Basically, on the assumption that when hyperinflation does happen, the government isn't going to confiscate everything, and even though brokerages would be in trouble or even fall, they'd keep the records alive as to who owns what rather than seize everything. And once I don't know exactly how, but once all the dust settles and everything is sorted out, those who own stocks through their brokerages now will still own them after everything is done. I don't know if that's going to happen. So it's risky. But I think it's likely enough to happen that I'm willing to stake some of my wealth on gold and silver mining stocks. There's so much that could happen because it's not like the 1930s or 40s where you could like call up a company directly and just like buy their stock and they would just sell it to you directly and then you own it. A lot of other researchers go into this in much more depth than I do, that you don't really own the stocks. You own a claim to a claim to a claim to a claim to a brokerage to a claim. And it's like it's a very derivative, very tenuous derivative chain. So who knows what's going to happen in the end. So like in terms of other stocks, like let's say Nvidia or any of these tech bubble stuff, I stay completely away from that. I have no idea what's going to happen to them in the end. This all seems like just inflation chasing bubbles, and it's all that is all definitely going to end. In terms of the resource stocks and the commodity stocks, better chance of keeping your wealth, and assuming your ownership titles to them don't get destroyed in an endgame scenario, you should end up pretty well with them, because companies that first of all are fiscally responsible and aren't tied to floating rate debt or anything, they should survive the end game in some form, and they should be able to pay real dividends, because that's the intrinsic value of a stock. How much is it going to pay you to hold it? Other than that, it's just a baseball card. So I'd stick to dividend paying resource stocks, not just gold and silver, other resource stocks as well, but not all of them, because who knows what you'll have in the end.
It sounds like you might have been referring there to David Rogers' Webb, The Great Taking, that book. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. That's become kind of a hot topic these days, with people saying that there's no reason to own any of these stocks because truly, as you mentioned, it's you have a claim on a claim on a claim, and they're setting up a network to be able to ultimately take everything in the event of this sort of collapse. How plausible do you think that scenario is? Have you read the book, and does it concern you?
No, I haven't read the book. Maybe I should, but from what I hear about it, I pretty much I get the point, and I can't disagree with the point. Like I've read outlines and that kind of stuff. I don't think I have to spend my time going through the details. I understand that they want to take everything. I understand that they're totalitarian kleptomaniacs. I get it, and I don't dispute that. My point in these things, these kind of arguments, is that yeah, they want to steal everything, but there's a limit to how much they can take before there's a revolt, right? Laws and legal structures and this and that, they in the end they're just words on paper. So if they really did take everything, and then people have, let's say, $1 million in their brokerage account, and then a great taking happens, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, you have nothing," and then this happens all over the country, you're not going to have law and order the next day. People are going to lynch the brokerage offices or whoever is in charge of taking them, they're not going to take it. So there's a limit to how much you can take. There's a limit to a great taking before people just erupt. And my point is, like, they can try, but they can't just enslave the planet. You can't have a situation where everyone is a slave. Um, uh, it cannot work. And I know they're trying, but that's irrelevant what they try. Like, you can't steal everything. And if you do, and if we're in a world where they can, and then we're all slaves, like, let's say theoretically the great taking happened and everybody loses all their stocks, and now that's all goes to the government, then okay, well, then everyone's a slave. And then what about the people who collect gold and silver? If they if they take all of your stocks, you don't think they're going to go into all of the gold and silver hoards all over the place, the ETFs and the private storages, and just like at gunpoint, just say, give it all to me? They will too. And people who have gold and silver won't be well off either. So, if you're saying that everything, they're going to steal everything and there's no point to living, well, then fine. Then just stop caring. Why are you even talking about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to talk about inflation. It's obviously been a massive problem around the world, particularly since they started printing money in response to the pandemic. We were discussing, I used to live in Croatia. I left Canada, and the inflation in Canada is crazy, but in Croatia, it ended up becoming just as crazy. A country that used to be essentially cheap became expensive. Living in Serbia, where I'm at, it's much cheaper. But as we were also discussing before we hit record today, for Serbian people, it's not. They make a lower salary, and inflation has also hit them hard. Central banks like to pretend that somehow they have a lever they can pull to control inflation. They're watching inflation levels and deciding on what to do in meetings, and they're going to try to get it under control. It all seems to be complete theater to me. Do you expect inflation to accelerate? First of all, in Israel, how have you seen the impacts of inflation personally? And do you expect prices to keep rising around the world until everything falls apart?
Yeah, I expect prices to keep rising and rising in fiat terms, and I expect them to keep falling and falling in gold and silver terms. So it's not the prices rising; it's the currencies dying, and the shekel is dying just like the dollar is dying. Um, and whenever you have a country that whose prices are rising a lot slower than other countries, the powers that be are going to go over there and tell them in no uncertain terms, you've got to match our monetary policy, or you're going to cause an imbalance in the dark side of the forest, I guess you could say. Where I'm experiencing, before that, we were talking about Croatia, and I heard that it was very expensive from other friends who lived in Croatia who now live in Israel. They moved here because it was getting too expensive in Croatia, and then I didn't even know that they changed to the euro recently. And I'm thinking, like, what kind of country would switch to the euro now? It seems insane. It seemed like, for all I know, the people in the ECB or the European Commission went into Croatia and put everyone in a headlock and said, look, switch to the euro now, or we're going to do whatever to you. I don't know what they threatened, but this is kind of how things work in the back end. So I would assume that's what happened. In terms of the shekel, Israel's doing the same thing that the Fed's doing. They're printing at the same rates. They're trying to keep the exchange rate in certain windows, and they're succeeding. But what I'm seeing is that groceries are getting a lot more expensive. And I just read an article. My favorite fruit is a lychee. That's my favorite fruit. And there's a lot of lychees in Israel, and they're very expensive. And I saw an article in one of the mainstream newspapers that it could be in a year or two they're going to start uprooting lychee trees because it's getting unsustainable to develop to grow them, because people can't afford them. And so I got my own lychee tree. I planted in my backyard, and hopefully it'll give me some fruit because I won't be able to rely on it. My favorite restaurants. They used to have very, very large menus with a lot of selection. Now it's very, very low selection. Quality is still okay, still good, but there's less choice. People can't afford to go out and eat. Besides that, it's not just the inflation; it's the fact that 100,000 people in northern Israel have been evacuated. I'm not one of them. I'm in the Golan side, which is higher. The Golan Heights. It's called the Golan Heights because it's higher, so it's harder to bomb here. whereas the Hezbollah is bombing mostly the Galilee, and a lot of the towns have been evacuated, so all the businesses there are dead, and that lowers productivity, obviously, and taxpayers have to pay for housing 100,000 Jews in hotels in the south and in the center of the country. So yeah, prices are getting worse here, but I'm rooting for it. I just like get this over with already. Just kill the shekel, kill the dollar, kill the euro. Just get it done with, because as I said in who was I talking to? I don't remember. One on my last interview that I put up on my channel, that Lebanon doesn't use the pound, Iran doesn't use the real or whatever the name of their currency is. Syria doesn't have a currency either. All these countries are hyperinflating garbage. So what do they use? How do they fund all this war, that all these bombs that they're sending over here? How does Yemen? Yemen doesn't have a currency either. None of these countries have any currency. They're all hyperinflated deadbeats. So what do they use? They use dollars. Dollars. They fund Israel, unfortunately. They fund all of Israel's enemies, unfortunately. So all we're doing is just throwing bombs funded by dollars at each other. Just kill the damn thing already, so we can stop fighting. All right, and then that's what I want.
I want to talk about the potential revaluation of gold by central banks or by governments, even in the West, either in the West to try to pay off enormous debts. Some people have floated that idea, well, they could just revalue gold and then use that to pay their debts. Or by the BRICS nations, that idea is being floated around as well, that the central bank of Russia or China could start revaluing gold to transact outside the US dollar. Is this all kind of fantasy talk? How does a gold revaluation work in practice?
A gold revaluation in practice would work, but let's say this is what FDR did in 1933, 1934, right? If a central bank has some gold on its balance sheet valued at $42.22, which is what it's still valued at in the United States, and then let's say they revalue it to $2,000 or $2,500, then all of a sudden the central bank has all these dollars on its balance sheet that it can print dollars to cover, right? It has 8,000 whatever tons of gold at $42.22. Now it's 2,500. So they print however many dollars now equals 8,000 tons times 2,500 versus 8,000 tons times 42, whatever amount of dollars that is. And then they just like hand it out to the banks. So yeah, that would cause hyperinflation. But that would be hyperinflation. There's no difference between a central bank doing it and the market doing it practically. If the market is already doing it, because the true value of gold right now, not even the true value of gold, the true value of gold as a non-monetary commodity, as jewelry or as industrial commodity is 2,500. The true value of gold as a monetary commodity would be all of dollar liabilities, all of fiat liabilities everywhere divided by the amount of above ground gold stocks owned by central banks everywhere, which would be like $30, $40, $45,000 an ounce, something like that. So, either it's going to be revalued by central banks or it's going to be revalued by the market, or it'll be revalued by the market and then the central banks will have to either die or revalue themselves. Either way, the currency is going to die. So either by central bank admission or by market forcing it. So it's the same thing.
I want to talk about how governments seem to be structured in the West these days. I was talking to David Morgan. He pointed out that no matter what party you vote for in the US, they're being controlled by corporate donors. So in a sense, he was saying it's a fascist system of government. I think that's true in many places around the world. How can we get these extraordinarily wealthy corporations and the sociopaths and in some cases psychopaths that run them out of the picture? And is this another common element of endgame scenarios for empires across history?
Yeah, well, the answer is ask yourself, how are these psychopaths and corporatists that bought government, how are they so rich? Well, because they have first dibs on the inflation spigot. So how do you cut under them? How do you undercut them? You kill the dollar. How do you kill the dollar? You go underneath it by buying gold and silver. And now I never say zero out your cash reserves and buy gold and silver, but the way that we can get together and undercut them so that they have no more inflationary power. The problem isn't necessarily that they're super spectacularly rich. The problem is that they become rich by stealing from us. If that theft line, if that pipe is broken by killing the dollar, then you could say, oh, fine, these corporatists, they have a lot of gold and silver, they're still rich. Okay. But then if the only way that they can spend their money is by recirculating it back into an economy where the middle class and the poor are, then their spending would make, by definition, the public, richer, versus the situation now where their spending, by definition, makes the middle class and the poor poorer, because the act of them spending inflation into the system destroys the value of the dollar. So destroy their ability to steal and make themselves rich in the process, and then they become just another powerful corporation that has money but has to spend it back into circulation and making people richer. Right? Make the act of their spending make us richer instead of us poorer, and then you can start evening out the pool again. And the way you do that is by destroying the fiat currency. And the beautiful thing about it is that in the era of censorship, which we saw a peak of in 2020, 2021, beginning of 2022, and they're still trying to censor all kinds of stuff, they won't try to censor people saying buy gold and silver, because they don't understand that is the core of their power. So we're safe in saying that. We're safe in telling people to stack for now. At some point they might get it, but by the time they get it, it'll be too late, right? By the time they're trying to censor people saying buy gold and silver, it means the currency's already dead. So we got to keep hitting this point. It's not only about securing your family's future. It is about that. It's about destroying their ability to steal and making us poor in the process. That's what it's about.
Well, Rafi, this has been a fantastic conversation as always. Love having you on the show, and definitely looking forward to the next time we chat. For those who do want to learn more, tell us about what you do at the Endgame Investor and where people can find it.
Yeah, so Endgame Investor at Substack. Check it out. You can subscribe for free. I usually give a few paragraphs for free on each post, and every so often I go off on a philosophical rant, and the whole article is free. But if you want to become a paying subscriber, that really helps out. It helps me continue my mission here. What I try to do is basically explain what I explain here, that it's not necessarily about the price of gold and silver on any given day. You got to keep, choking higher and higher up the, up the pipe or the snake or whatever you want to say, and keep cash reserve and buy the dips and keep increasing your gold and silver reserves. And I try to bring people through it intellectually to understand what is happening here above and beyond the daily wiggles, so people aren't so focused on price and more focused on the mission, that what we have to do is unite and keep stacking for the purpose of killing the dollar, and to stay emotionally balanced through that process, which is going to be difficult. So Substack, you can also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/endgameinvestor for a more religious angle on what's going on here. And my YouTube channel, Rafi Farber, follow there. And that's pretty much it.
Great. Well, I'll put links to everything you mentioned in the description below for people who want to check it out. Thank you once again, Rafi, for coming on and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
Thanks, Jesse, for having me, and it's always good to be chatting with you.
And thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, this episode is sponsored by ARC Silver Gold Osmium for all your precious metals needs. Head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.